Hey, and welcome to an IC82 workshop special. We're back in Crewe Works, or at least a temporary Crewe Works, whilst the room is still being finished off, but we're nearly there. Since the mailroom facility opened up, I've been sent in quite a lot of locos by people, and one particular loco that came in from a lad called Caleb was a beautiful A4 Mallard by Hornby. However, before we look at her, and before we see her running and everything like that, we've had to bring her into Crewe Works, which isn't unknown of for things that get sent into the channel, but this particular Mallard has got one or two issues that need sorting out, hopefully. So here we are in a sort of makeshift Crewe Works with my right-hand man, DCC man, who's going to take a look at this Mallard and talk us through just what's not quite right with her.
Okay, hi everyone. Yeah, there were several things that immediately jumped out when we looked at Mallard that mean that we just couldn't even try and run her. Everything looks fine on the surface, and she looks like a beautiful model. But if we take the tender away and turn her over, then several things start to come apparent. First of all, the most obvious problem, which is what alerted us to need to bring her into Crewe Works, is this plug that connects to the tender. Now, this particular version of Mallard is one of Hornby's more recent versions.
So is it DCC ready?
Yeah, so they've made it DCC ready with an 8-pin socket in the tender.
Yeah.
So the motor is still located within the actual locomotive, and all the pickups are still located within the locomotive, but it passes the power out to the tender, where there may or may not be a decoder, and then that passes the power back so that it can actually activate the motor and make it move.
Mm-hmm.
Now, those plugs are very, very delicate. In order to be able to make it so that the train can still flexibly move around all the various different curves, and it can still be picked up and moved around fairly easily, the wires are very, very fine, and the connector is very, very small. And unfortunately, I don't know if the camera will be able to pick this one up if we move in a little bit closer.
I'll zoom in a little bit.
Can you just see that there should be 4 wires going into that plug?
But there aren't.
And there are only 3.
Yeah, what's happened?
So obviously somewhere along the lines, one of the wires has snapped off, come out and disappeared, which means that this locomotive just won't run. There's something interesting going on between the wheels here, where it looks like there's been some attempt to solder something or connect something. I'm not quite sure.
No.
And then you see either side and you actually look at the connecting rods and linkage, and they're a little bit bent.
That's quite a common thing though with the Hornby A4s. That I've heard lots of reports of faulty and annoying linkage.
Well, even we had trouble with FALCON originally with one of the parts of her connecting linkage and connecting rods.
Yeah.
But these ones are particularly bad. They seem to have come out of the actual
the housing, the cylinders.
The cylinders, yes, they seem to have come out of the actual cylinders.
That's fine. I know those parts. But
sorry,
you're not going
forgot myself for a second.
It's fine.
They seem to have come out of the cylinders completely, and the ones on this bottom side, as looking at it now, are completely bent, buckled and bent, as if they've tried to run.
Yeah.
While they've been shifted out of the cylinders, and as a result, they've twisted and contorted a little bit. Right. So even if we fix the motor issue, we're also going to have a look at the linkage to make sure that it's straight enough that it won't interfere with the smooth running of the wheels.
Right. So,
to get her running,
first
job, we're going to obviously have to open her up, get the body off and have a look.
Perform surgery.
Perform some surgery, yeah.
General anaesthetic?
And have a look inside and see if we can try and trace some of this wiring and see if we can at least temporarily patch her up.
Yeah. That's fine.
We're also going to have to take off this bottom section that holds the wheels in place and see if we can just check out what's going on underneath there and make sure there's nothing untoward that's going to interfere with the running.
Okay, so what kinds of things, before we continue, what kinds of tools, what kinds of things do we need to carry out what we're going to do?
Tools-wise, because it is a slightly more recent version, the two parts of the locomotive are actually held together with a screw, so we're going to need a small-ish flat screwdriver.
Yeah.
Craft
mat, obviously.
A craft mat, obviously, to do it on and protect the table.
We do have a local cradle just here, off shot.
Yeah.
If we need it.
I've got various different sizes of pliers. In order to be able to try and pull bits out if they get a little bit jammed.
Nice and precision, I see.
Some of them,
relatively.
Yeah. And if they're not precision enough, then I've got a pair of tweezers as well to be able to really get in tight if I need to. And as well as the soldering iron and some solder and all that kind of stuff, we need a cup of tea.
Yeah. I'm just finishing off a latte as we speak, actually. So yeah, you need to fuel the surgeon.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Okay.
So, first step, removing the body. Okay, so we've placed Mallard in the loco cradle, so she's upside down and nicely protected, and we can have a look at how to remove the body. And if we just move the front truck out of the way, just hidden underneath here is a small screw that actually holds the entire thing in place.
Yes.
So if I loosen that, tweezers to get it out. There we go. Okay, so that should now be enough to release the whole body from the chassis. But we need to be very careful. Obviously, some of this linkage is quite delicate at the moment, and there's very few places to be able to hold on to it firmly. So
this is Crewe Works, we're professionals. There's nothing we can't do.
Very carefully lift her up.
Oh, look at that!
And
what?
There's something I've forgotten.
What? What have you forgotten?
As I'm about to lift her up, I suddenly noticed and remembered.
What?
If I turn it around, you might be able to see.
Okay, I'll see if I can zoom in. If you can just move it.
I'm trying to look at this section here. Okay, so just in here, the linkage, is that the speedometer?
Yes, it could well be, yes.
But that basically actually connects to the body. Now, if you remember when we did have problems with FALCON and things like that quite a long time ago.
Yeah, years ago.
Which is documented in another video.
Yes, put the link below.
One of the issues was to do with the way in which it connected with the body and was basically snapping off and breaking up.
Yeah, it had to be modified a little bit, didn't it?
Now it seems that Hornby have modified things a little since then, because this section is actually connected to the body with a small metal loop that pushes into two holes and holds it firmly in place.
Right.
So it's a lot sturdier and less likely to just snap off.
Yeah.
But it does mean that I need to remove that in order to remove this entire section.
The chassis.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So this is fiddly.
Yeah.
Not only can it ping across the room if you pull too tightly, obviously you want to do it as delicately as possible to be able to not bend it or misshape it to put it back in again afterwards. So I'm going to use the tweezers, and these will just slip in underneath the loop and allow me to pull upwards, and then that comes out like that.
Like a pro.
Okay. Now, the tricky bit is to make sure that you don't then lose it. That will obviously slip around and slide around and come out of that hole if you're not careful, so we will monitor that very carefully when we turn it the other way around. Okay, so try one more time. Lift her up, slide her forward.
Oh,
away
there
she
we go.
comes.
Yep.
Turn her over, and there we go.
One removed chassis. Just quickly, what would you suggest if somebody's not quite confident enough to do what you've just done? Maybe they've never removed the chassis before, maybe they're worried about breaking something, but there is a problem, what would you recommend?
Obviously, if there is something incredibly delicate with one of these sort of super fine detail models that could snap or break, I would probably advise to make sure you speak to someone who perhaps has a little bit more experience that might be able to help you out, or pop along to your local model shop or hobby shop, see if they've got somebody that can do some of the work for you.
Yeah, most of them do repairs and stuff.
Then we can also see, obviously, like we said, the connecting rods aren't properly into the cylinders, so they're just dangling loose at the bottom.
I've never seen an A4 like it.
And we need to have a look at them. And then we move round to the back, and this is where the wiring starts to flow through and come to this plug at the back. So, on closer inspection, you will not see this on camera, but the 3 wires go all the way up here. Yeah, maybe. The 3 wires go all the way up here into this little knot, where obviously it's kind of been knotted together to stop it from twisting and snagging too much. But the 4th wire, the mystery 4th wire, just stops there. So it's just jutting out at the end of that knot and then vanishes. So it could possibly be, where the knot is lying, is this little nodule, for want of a better word, that links on to the back of the body to stop the back end falling out when you lift it up. And so it's possible that maybe that little fine wire has been caught when the two have been put back together, and by pinching it, it's caused the wire to snap, and then when the wire's dangled out and dropped loose, it's been pulled out of the plug, and so that entire section's just disappeared off somewhere.
Right. Yikes.
Yeah. So, how are we going to tackle it? In an ideal world, what we'd need to do is completely replace this plug.
Yep.
And having a little look around on various websites and forums, these are available. I think it's part X6113 off the top of my head, if I remembered it right, from the Hornby Spares section. And it costs about £3.50, I think it is, from Hornby Direct, and you can get it from other retailers as well.
We'll put details in the description below.
So we could order one of those harnesses that comes with all 4 wires connected, and then we basically just resolder the connections and replace it. Unfortunately, obviously we didn't have that, and we didn't know exactly what we were going to need to do until we got inside her.
No.
So in order for us to be able to get her running, and also more importantly to make sure that all the other fixes that we do are working before we bother spending money on trying to get parts that might not do anything.
Yeah.
What I'm going to try and achieve is to bypass this plug completely.
As a temporary
Yeah.
solution.
As I said before, the idea is that obviously out of the box this locomotive will run on DC.
Yes.
So it'll pick up positive charge from one side that will pass through the pickups, through one of the wires, down through to the plug, into the tender, and then through the blanking plate that's in the tender at the moment. And that blanking plate will just connect straight across to send the power straight back to the motor. Then from the motor it will come back to the tender, and across the blanking plate it will just shoot straight across to the negative terminal, and then it will pass back to the pickups. Okay. So in theory, what I can do is find the pickup wire, find the positive pickup wire, sorry, the negative pickup wire, and the 2 wires to the motor, work out which one of the wires it is that's missing from this harness, and basically splice them together and create a direct circuit from pickup to motor, motor to pickup, as if this was just a DC locomotive.
So you're talking about bypassing the tender altogether?
Yeah, bypassing the tender altogether and essentially turning it back into a plain DC loco.
Just for the time being?
Yeah, and then if that works we can desolder those joints and wire in a harness properly for the future.
Yep, sounds good.
Okay, so if we're going to try and perform heart bypass surgery, I suppose, on the locomotive, we need to try and work out what that missing wire was actually supposed to do. And I'm sure there are people screaming at their TV screens, monitor screens, tablets, phones, whatever they're watching us on
Yes.
right now, saying that they know straight away what that middle wire is supposed to be. But for completist sake, let's go through and just check it. So we're missing, out of this plug, the third wire.
Just zoom in ever so gently.
Okay. So it connects in that way round, and so we're missing this third wire from that side.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. So on the tender, if we flip the tender round, okay, that plug would fit that way
Yes.
into the tender, and so we're missing that third pin. 1, 2, 3. Okay.
Right. So this is where the internet can help.
A little. First we need to delve inside the tender, so there's another screw at this end that I've already loosened for speed, so I can now just lift that top section off.
Yep.
Okay. And on the inside, that little tiny plug turns into this little tiny circuit board.
Ah, right.
Okay. So where on the bottom we were looking at the third pin that way, so 1, 2, 3 down.
Yeah.
When we flip it over, we're now looking at 3 up. 1, 2, 3. So the pin that's missing, or the wire that's missing, attaches to this pin here.
Okay, I'll zoom in a little bit more, but you're going to have to move your hands so that we can see it, okay?
Okay, so we're in extreme close-up, and we're now counting 1, 2, 3 upwards, and it's this pin here. And so if we then follow that round, you can see that that connects to one of these 2 black wires here, which then flow off back down the tender to the DCC socket.
That's the blanking plate.
So what we're going to need to do is now whip off this weight. That obviously adds a little bit of extra traction to the tender. Pop out the socket and have a look where this actually connects.
Okay.
Okay. So then, whipping off the weight and having a look at this wiring, it's quite difficult to kind of follow this all around on camera without literally stripping it all apart. So you'll have to believe me on this one. But I've been able to follow this black wire from that third pin along where it goes to here, where it wraps back round to the socket, and it solders at the back onto that pin there. And that pin there is pin 1.
Right.
So we're missing the wire that connects to pin 1 of the DCC socket.
How odd though that pin 1 is actually like position 3 or 2 in the series of 4 pins. You'd think it'd like go from side to side, but no.
No.
Okay.
So a little bit of research on the internet, or if you look at the various instruction manuals that come with decoders and things like that, you can see clearly what each of the 8 pins actually is for. Some of them are for going off to different functions, so lights and sound. One of them is to go off to the motor, and then one of them is to the return from the motor.
Yeah.
And 2 of them are for the power pickups.
Right.
Okay. So essentially it goes pin 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, so following that wire from the connector through all the various different loops of wire to the plug, it's possible to find that the missing wire is connected to pin number 1.
Right.
And so looking up the wiring diagram for a standard DCC socket, pin 1 should go to the motor positive or motor right. Technically in DCC there isn't really a positive and negative, it's different.
Yeah.
But because we are looking at DC, it is going to the motor positive, and so that should connect directly to pin 8, which is for the rail right or rail positive.
Okay.
So follow pin 8 back from the back of the harness round and round and round to our socket. It's basically the other black wire, and that black wire is at the farmost pin, and so we now know that we need to connect together on our locomotive this outermost wire
Yes.
with the stub of the missing wire.
The one that would go right next to it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, because we're dealing with DCC wire, and this is like nanometers thick, I don't know if you can actually see this properly at home or not.
I'll just zoom in a little bit.
Even then you might not get it properly, but I've trimmed off those 2 wires. Ooh, there we go. I've trimmed off those 2 wires, there you can just see them.
Yes.
They're the 2 that need to connect together. So that's the stubby little one that was left over from the pinch before, and this is the one that it should connect to.
That's very impressive. They look about as thick as a human hair.
Probably less. So all I'm going to do, I apologise for the big fat fingers, now you zoomed in, is wrap those 2 around each other to create a nice electrical connection.
Yep.
Hopefully. Which is easier said than done when it is so thin. Okay, so I've managed to twist those 2 together to make an electrical connection, and then we need to solder. Let the solder flow into the joint between the 2, and that is done. Okay, so we're back, which for you seems seconds, but for us is about 3 hours. Because there was a slight complication. I soldered the wires together, I taped them up to insulate them, and thought it would probably best to test off camera before I risk embarrassment, only to find that there was absolutely nothing happening at all. And then it kind of all fell into place. There are actually no pickups on the locomotive. That bit at the bottom where we said it looked like something had been cut or something had been soldered or something connected somewhere, was where the pickups used to connect to the wheels, and then the power would be carried through to the tender. The tender has some pickups of its own as well, to obviously add to the overall system to try and make it more reliable, but because we'd cut off the plug and disconnected the tender, it meant there was no power being picked up at all. So we looked back at Caleb's letter that came with the locomotive and realised that we'd completely forgotten what he'd originally written, hadn't we?
Yeah. He did state in the letter that the contacts had been removed, possibly by accident, not by himself, and that the locomotive also had the problem with the plug. So he did say in the letter that there were issues, but a few of those issues had been forgotten.
So, a hasty rethink later means that I've now changed the plan slightly because we need to rely on the pickups in the tender to be able to get power to the motor in the locomotive. So, what I've done, for sheer ease more than anything else, I've soldered on to the blanking plate in the DCC socket over here. Because obviously they're 10 a penny, we've got plenty of spares. It's only a very simple piece of circuitry, so it doesn't hurt to just solder on top of that. So I've soldered one piece of wire up to the top, pin 8, and one pin down at the bottom on pin 5. Okay, so with a little bit of precision and a little bit of patience, the connecting rods have been bent back into position and into shape. Some of them aren't perfect. I mean, it's going to be probably near impossible to do that without literally stripping things down completely and doing it very, very carefully, bit by bit. But they are straight enough for the wheels to rotate properly and for the rods to not lock into each other and knock into each other. And what I've managed to do is unscrew the front truck, which had one screw holding it into the chassis, which allowed me to remove that section, revealing another screw attaching the actual cylinder piece to the chassis here. So by taking that off, it made it a lot easier to then feed the 3 separate sections back into the relevant holes on either side of the cylinders, then screw it back into place to lock them in. And so now both sides, the connecting rods are all properly fixed in position, and so what I need to do now is reattach the truck, reattach the body, and then we'll give her some tests. Okay, so here she is, without her body obviously. All the connecting rods are in place, the cylinders are replaced and properly screwed in, the front truck is reattached, all of the wires have been secured and insulated using some insulating tape to make sure they're not going to slip, and to also make sure that they don't snag and leave too much slack in between the in between the tender and the locomotive. And everything is soldered together so that power comes from the tender to the front to drive it. All I need to do now is put the body back onto the chassis, and then we can give her a test on the track.
Well, hey, and welcome to part 2 of the IC82 workshop video on Mallard. It's a whole other day. An entire day has gone. People have been to sleep. The world has spun around, and interestingly, Mallard's wheels have also spun around. How about that? It's been really quite hard to get this locomotive running, but she is, after spending a record amount of time in Crewe Works, running. So at this point I will hand it over to Craig, who has been working on her, and he'll talk us through what's happened.
Yeah, so since yesterday we obviously finished off all the wiring and had to modify our plans in terms of where the power was coming from, but in all that fiddling around and all the rewiring, we've managed to get her to a running condition. So we've put her onto the rolling road to check that everything's working and keep our eye on all that linkage and make sure none of it's snagging. And so it's time to give her a little bit of power.
Yeah, give it some juice.
Okay.
And I think she'll go quite slow as well. I think she handles slow speed. I was just playing with the controls before filming.
Oh, were you?
Yeah, and not take it down, right down.
Oh yeah.
Look at that. How incredible is that? Look at that. Just look how smooth and slow and steady that is. Okay, yeah, it's on a rolling road and there's nothing that she's having to pull, but I'd say that's a good job done.
Definitely. And she's really quiet as well.
Yeah, she is. There's a little bit of noise at speed, but I think that's just the rolling road. I don't think that's necessarily her mechanism. But that linkage is all moving around really nicely, and if you just take her up to speed again, I'll pan out a little bit. Yeah, that's cool. That is really cool.
Job well done, I think.
Job very well done. I'm sure Caleb is happy to see Mallard running so beautifully again, and it's important to mention that this is just a temporary fix because there is the plug that needs replacing.
Yes.
So Mallard will be revisiting Crewe Works before she gets sent back. But if Caleb, if you're watching, and I know you probably are, and you don't want any more modifications made to her, do get in touch and let me know. Alternatively, if you want to give me the go-ahead to have a new plug fitted, then we'll get that done for you, okay? So make sure you get in touch. But yeah, Mallard, fixed by Crewe Works. I wonder what Stania and Gresley would say about that. I'm sure they'd both be just very happy that a stunning steam engine was running again.